Hello, this is Lora O'Brien from the Irish Pagan School, and I'm here with my good friend Morgan Daimler. Morgan Akara, can you share a bit about your background and how you began your journey with Irish mythology and folklore? And then we get into your work and all the rest of it in a few minutes.
Sure. So I'm part of the dreaded Irish American diaspora, which is rightfully
We
dreaded.
don't
Just
dread
putting that out there.
it.
You should. Everyone should. Yeah, my grandfather was from Cork, and so I grew up with sort of the culture, but a step to the side, which is mostly what the diaspora is. Antiquated and a step to the side, which is extra fun. But it meant that from a young age, I had a lot of interest in it. I was always drawn to the stories, particularly around the Tinashi, the good folk. Ironically, or not, however you want to look at it, my best friend growing up was Irish. She was from Connemara and moved here as a child, and so that kind of just reinforced
Mm.
my interest in it all. And when I was a teenager, I started really studying, particularly the folklore and to a lesser degree the mythology, because I was having experiences myself. I was having things happen, and I wanted some context for them. I wanted to understand, and also just feel like I wasn't the only person ever who had dealt with
Mhm.
certain things.
Yeah,
you know, it's a great thing about
I do
folklore.
know. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great thing about folklore is a lot of times you'll find that in fact other people have had the same experience. Sometimes many other people have had the same experience, so kind of drew me into it that way. And then I was practicing a form of pagan witchcraft, very focused on the Irish gods and goddesses, and ended up being particularly drawn to Macha, who is one of the three Morgans. And that eventually led me to realize that most of the translations that are out there of Irish mythology are terrible. Full offense intended to Whitley Stokes, wherever his spirit currently
Absolutely.
resides.
Yes.
Yes. And so in about 2013, 2014, I started learning Old and Middle Irish, self taught, because I wanted to be able to read the material in the original language because there are a lot of issues, and there are. Um, always caution people be very hesitant with English language translations. Like, don't assume too much
Hmm.
based on them.
Yes.
Um, because particularly the public domain ones, the Victorian era ones, are just awful. They are awful.
They
Cunha
are.
Myers is a little exception, but the majority of them are just awful. So that sort of then led me down this path of doing translation work, and getting into the original myths, and it just all kind of spiraled out of control from there, and that's how I
Or
ended up.
into control.
It spiraled somewhere. Um, yeah,
Still spiraling.
definitely still spiraling. Yeah, so that's
That's
kind of how I ended up where I am.
that's awesome. We would have met first at a conference. We were definitely aware of each other's work in that previously, but a conference, PantheaCon, wasn't it?
I believe in 2015.
Yeah,
Yes,
so we're in
PantheaCon.
our, actually it would have been around now. Where is this? This is our
Yeah,
anniversary
that's
interview
true.
series.
Friendiversary. Yeah. It's hard to believe it's been a decade.
Yeah, that's
It's one of
amazing.
those. It feels much longer, and also like it can't possibly have been that long.
Yeah. Well, we were just before we got on, we hit record here. We were trying to figure out the respective ages of each other's children, and it was like, oh no, how did that happen?
Yeah,
it
yeah.
has it
It's
has been that long. Yeah, yeah.
it has, which is a good thing, but
Mm,
also,
yeah,
yikes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in that time, as your own relationship, I think, with Na Daoine Maithe developed, you actually had an experience, and ended up as a priest of Na Daoine Maithe. And do you want to talk about that? I know you've talked about it elsewhere, but just maybe
Sure.
briefly, just tell people what that means.
Sure. I'm going to preface this by saying I do not recommend this.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just want to put that out there because I do think a lot of people kind of misunderstand
Yeah,
uh,
they see it as a
how this
target to
works.
aim for.
Yes, they
Yeah,
see it
I
as
get
it's
that
hard
with
to
the
aim
Morgan.
for.
Yeah, I get that with the
Exactly.
Morgan stuff. Yeah.
And I think people see it as something that's much more glamorous in some sense, which I'm sure you also get a lot with the Morrigan.
Less
And
glamour, more mud.
yes, yes, lots of hard work. And I like to tell people when we talk about the subject that, yes, I am a priest for themselves. I am dedicated to one particular queen of the good folk, and her nickname for me, her pet name for me, is Servant.
Yeah, yeah,
So just to give this some context for people to
absolutely.
contemplate,
Mm.
it is definitely not like living in a fantasy novel at all.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd been having experiences with the good folk most of my life, and I like to say that I'm fortunate I did grow up in the diaspora community that I grew up in and with the family that I had in that aspect at least, because there was a lot of acceptance of it. When I would be talking to my parents when I was a little child about, oh, I'm going to leave an offering for the fairies on my windowsill, and making them little houses. I got into a lot of interesting things when I was a young
Mm.
child. And I think a lot of other families would have put a stop to it and been like, no, that's nonsense, that's silly, you know. Whereas my family was just like, okay,
Yeah.
you know, if that's what you believe. And I had grown up with the idea of like, if you're outside and you're drinking something, you pour a little out on the ground first because the good folk are owed that. If you drop food on the ground in or out of a house, then that means the good folk want it and you give it to them. And these were things that I all found out later are actually
There-
established folk
Yeah,
practices.
absolutely. That's what I would
Yeah.
have grown up with as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, this is where the folklore came in and was really
Mm.
helpful for me because up till then I didn't have the same context for it. But finding out other people did these things was very reassuring. And I had primarily focused on the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Irish gods. And when I went to Ireland for the first time in 2016, it was for that purpose. We were actually doing like a Morgan sacred site tour. And I swear to everyone listening, that was my intention when I went. At the
I remember.
time,
I remember. I can attest.
yeah, I look back on it now and I'm like, I feel like people assumed that there was some ulterior motive. That's not
No,
what happened.
no.
Um,
Innocent. Innocent you
yes. Yeah, I was
like a lamb to the
very
slaughter.
I was trying to think a nice way to say that. Yes. Yes, I fully walked into a situation I should have seen coming and did not see coming. And then by the time I realized what was going on, I was too far in
Yeah. Oh,
to
and
get
just to be
myself
clear,
out.
just in case anybody misreads that, none of us saw it coming. It wasn't that we were
Yeah.
all sitting around laughing at Morgan. Like,
Right.
none of us saw it coming. We were all on the same page going in,
Yeah.
and then ended up in a very different
It's
situation.
funny. It's funny too, because in hindsight, after the fact, looking back on it, I was like,
Hmm.
oh, there were all of these warning
Mhm.
signs
Yeah,
that this is the direction things were going in.
that
But
none of us
but
saw.
yeah, yeah, in the moment, completely oblivious.
Hmm.
So yeah, I went in with this, we're doing this Morgan Sacred Sites tour, and I was very excited about that and excited to get to see places that are in the stories because I am definitely one of those people who loves, if I'm translating a myth and then knowing this is where that happened,
Mm.
you know, this is where that story is like anchored in place. I love that.
Mm.
And then, yeah, very quickly, my portion of the trip went sideways, and I was getting a lot of good folk related things going on, and ended up going through what I refer to now as like a unanticipated initiation
Mhm.
through the she, which again, do not recommend for anyone else. It was a very intense experience. and I don't regret it. And I don't regret like where I have been in the almost 10 years since then. But it's definitely not something I'd encourage people to go out trying to do. And it's had some real tangible effects on me. And the one that I like to point to the most, just because it's funny, is my hair. My hair was pin straight my entire life. And I mean, from birth through when I went to Ireland. And within about a year of going through that initiation experience, it started curling. And it's still, I have waist length curly hair now, which is ridiculous.
Yep.
Ridiculous. And anyone who wants to know like what impact does something like this practically have, look at my work, my writing. I had written a little about the good folk. I'm not going to pretend that I hadn't up to that point. And I would occasionally do like smaller local classes and things like that. But once that came in and once that happened, it was made very clear to me that like my main purpose in serving them was to get certain information out and to particularly highlight or draw attention to the actual folk beliefs. And Ireland in particular, this is also true of Scotland and Wales, but Ireland in particular has really just been mauled when it comes to the way that material gets taken and then rewritten and repeated and presented as genuine when it is not. So I've been working over the last 7 or 8 years to try to firstly get better information out there to a wider audience. You know, I have a certain amount of privilege being an author in the US, a certain audience. So I try to get that information and also to try to highlight people in Ireland who are the ones everyone should be listening to anyway on this topic. Because I found really quickly that there's a strange thing in the US where people tend to look more to a certain demographic of author, which I'm only partially belonging to. Trying really hard not to say men, but oops, I said it. So yeah, there's a certain voice of authority.
We could put that Simpsons code in here. You know, I'm a middle-aged white man. Everybody listens to me, and leave it at that, right? It's a Simpsons quote. We're not saying anything.
It is. And people will kind of roll their eyes and be like, that's not true, but it really is. Even now, I'll have people recommending the works of, effectively middle-aged white male authors. For me, if I really want to learn about this topic.
Yeah. And interestingly, like we do laugh about the gender thing, but when you don't have the gender option, Americans still seem to default to Americans.
Yeah.
Because obviously I would experience that with the Morgan stuff where I get recommended to join a group and get initiated or something like that, and so that I can be a real priest. It's like,
right.
Okay. And I suppose what I want to really highlight for people, and what you've already highlighted, is, when we're talking about priesthood in this way, it's a job description is all. It's like, yes, it's a title, but it's a title of servant. It's a title of, worker. It is literally, you are signing up to do this work. And by the time these kind of spontaneous, and I know that we've had very similar experiences in a lot of ways, with myself with the Morgan and you with Na Daoine Maithe, or Na Daoine Maithe, where by the time you get to that spontaneous initiation point, like, you didn't just show up in Ireland and get this benefit, this dubious benefit, right? But you didn't just have this spontaneous experience out of nowhere. The same way I didn't have a spontaneous experience out of nowhere with the Morgan. When I showed up at the Morgan's cave, there had already been a decade, 2 decades of really extensive work and preparation work, and us being prepared, us being put through the absolute mill, the ringer, to make us the type of people who would be ready, willing, and able to do this kind of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And then extensive studying, experience, networking, put like just physically putting ourselves in positions where we would learn from the source material that we need to learn from to be part of this and to be ready then. So by the time
Mm-hmm.
we get into these situations, again, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's not some random chance occurrence that anybody could just turn up. And it's not saying that we're super special or anything. It's just that we have actually put in the work, and that qualifies us for the job. Right?
I think that's where that hindsight
Yeah.
comes in. Like when you go into it, you don't see it coming. And I know at least for my part, it was very caught off guard.
Mm,
But then when you look back, you're like, okay, well, but I have been doing this for this amount of time. I have
mm,
had this connection for this amount of time. I have, like that checklist. I've done this, this,
mm-hmm.
this, and this.
Yeah.
Um, I will say I truly believe, and I think this is true for the gods, but it's definitely 100% true for the good folk, that we have no control
Mm,
over whether they do or do not initiate someone or make someone a priest or a priestess or what have you. That is entirely up to them, how they're going to do it, what they're going to do.
100% my experience as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So I don't think this is something that you can intentionally
Mm.
want to have happen or and actually knowing them, I think if you went into it trying to make it happen, it would not happen.
Yes. Now, what I will say is what you can do is, again, put in the work, prepare yourself, and be ready, willing, and able to do the work. But whether you get this, like, again, this dubious honor of
Yeah.
this title is entirely up to them. But I think for all of us, we can build relationship. We can
Yes.
actively work to build relationship. And as I refer to it as core cuivness, which is right relationship, which is core is as you know, Morgan, but for anybody else watching, it's COIR. And it's an old Irish term that expresses so it's not CORE, it's but just for people who kind of equate those things. But rightness, justice, there's so many different concepts that are built into this that really express like this right relationship
Yes.
concept. And I think that is found in a lot of native and indigenous cultures, spiritualities, this concept of relationship and being in right relationship with not just with your gods, but with yourself, with your community, with everything around you.
So I'm really glad that we've kind of drifted into this direction. I'm really glad you used that particular phrase because I do think it's a relationship. And I think that one of the things that I see most often that will say whatever concerns me,
Mm,
um, and this I think is a particularly US based mindset, is there's a more of a transactional
mm,
approach. There's this idea that if you put in X amount of effort, you earn Y.
mm,
And it's just not like that. It's like a relationship,
yeah.
you can put in a lot of effort into a relationship, but there's no like guaranteed outcome. There's just directions
Mm-hmm.
that things tend to flow in from that point. And I think that a key aspect of being in right relationship is understanding that it is a relationship.
Yeah.
That's not just a fancy term.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I really encourage people to, when they're approaching the gods or Na Daoine Maithe or whoever, whatever entities you want to be working with, approaching them as you would if you were looking to maybe be in a mentor relationship with somebody, or a friendship with somebody, but it is somebody who is of higher standing than you. you
Mm-hmm.
know it is not a relationship of peers or equals. It is you coming to them, and you have to put in the effort, you have to seek it out, you have to do the work, you have to be the type of person that they would like to be in relationship with. But again, as Morgan says, there's still no guarantee. And like, they have their own agendas, they have their own needs, they have their own plans and strategies all in the works, whatever it is. that we may never know anything about. So it's not necessarily that you're being rejected because of the person that you are. If that doesn't happen, like you can still have a very fulfilling devotional relationship, you know.
Mm.
But the priesthood then kind of is where there's a little bit more give and take, maybe. But it's hard to quantify because it's so different for everybody.
I just think it's important for us to go into any situation, with the understanding that gods and the other crowd and whatever spirits we're talking about are independent beings with
Yes.
agency.
Yes.
And I tell this story sometimes, mostly because I think it's funny, but you know, accurate in this context that a year or two before the whole became a priest of the Ishi thing happened, I was trying to connect with the god Lu. Um, and I had various reasons why that made a lot of sense to me in the moment. But every time I would try, I would do guided meditations, I would do spiritual journey work, I would do everything I thought I could on my end to like nurture this relationship. I always had a sensation like a ringing phone that's not getting picked up.
Yeah.
And I am a stubborn person.
No.
Shocking.
You?
Yes. I taught myself a language might have been the first clue that I could be a little persistent.
That was not the first clue.
Okay, well, a clue. And I just wouldn't give up. And I just kept my brain got into this mindset of I just need to try harder. I just need to do more. I just need to whatever. And so I finally had a visionary experience, I think in a spiritual journey where I did connect with Lou, and he gave me like the literal sitcom "It's not me, it's you" speech, like very clearly telling me like you need to stop. Like, this is not you're not getting any of the context clues here. Stop. Like this is not it's not going to go anywhere. Which of course at the time I was mortified.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time I'd ever
Yeah.
yeah, the first time in any kind of spiritual or devotional work where I had an experience with a deity where it was very clear like no. No boundaries, no consent, no stop.
Yeah.
But I tell the story because I do think we have to understand that just because we're interested in something does not mean that is going to happen.
And again, it's like any relationship, but you
Yeah.
can really put it in terms of any relationship, but just bear in mind that like no matter how much you want something, like that person is not going to fall in love with you if you want a love or a romantic relationship with them, if they're not that way inclined, or if they're not ready for it or open for it, or they might have other things going on that you know nothing about. And you really have to look at it in the same terms. And it's not that we're trying to impose human terms on God's spirits, ancestors, deities, all the rest of it. It's that we are humans, so we have to have it in ways that we understand. And as teachers, we have to express it in ways that people are going to understand. And that's the clearest analogy that I have ever come up with based on my own experiences.
Yeah. And I think this is something it's good for us to be talking about because nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about what happens when you're interested in a spirit or a deity or what have you, and they are clearly not reciprocating.
Yeah.
I think we do have this idea just because of the way modern neo-paganism is that you just pick a deity that you like or that you feel called to, and
even better, pick from a list.
Yes, the infamous correspondence list.
So many books.
Yeah.
If you're interested in love, go to this. And it's just like it's like sweetie jars on a shelf, you're just supposed to take it. I always refer to it as the pick and mix,
Yes. Yeah, but that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to have a conversation about why that's not ideal, but also why that doesn't always even work.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you are going to pick a name and that attached deity is not gonna want any part of it.
No, these are autonomous beings that deserve our respect
Yep.
the same way, again, any human would deserve our respect. I don't
Yeah.
understand why people would treat them any different. Although I know
Yeah.
some people treat humans that way too. So I guess maybe I'm
And
expecting too much.
yeah, and not having that connection, it's not bad. It's not
Nope,
a judgment.
nope.
I did feel embarrassed at the time, but I felt more embarrassed because I just was so persistent about it that it got to that point. But there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with it. And actually, now knowing more about Lou and having read more of his stories, and gotten a lot more in depth than I was at that time, whatever it was, 12, 13 years ago, I really understand why.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can see now in
I can see it.
hindsight why.
Yeah. I can see it.
Yeah.
I can see where the attraction was coming from, to be honest. But yeah, no, I can really see it. And that's not even taken into account what has opened up for you since, and it's that situation of like every time you say yes to something or something says yes to you, that's a no to something else that might actually be much more your path and your potential wrapped up in that's exactly what happened to you. So be careful what you wish for, people. You just might get it and then you're stuck
Yeah.
with Lou. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, I think we just need to have that understanding, like you said, that it's like a relationship with a human. There's things that are better for you and not as good for you. And there's um, spirits that'll be interested and there's spirits that won't. And that's just life. That's just how things are.
Yeah, awesome. So I'd like to just finish up this introduction interview with saying that this is the start of a new series that we're going to be publishing on the Irish Pagan Schools. So there will be a playlist at the end of this video, which will link you to whatever else is published. But if you subscribe to the channel and get notifications, then you'll be told whenever a new video comes out. We have about 10 video series planned, which will be recorded over time and put out on the channel. So we'll be exploring various topics because you really do have, like we've talked about Na Daoine Maithe, but you have such a variety of over 3 dozen books published. So like, you're a multi-passionate author and teacher. And like, what drives this passion for sharing knowledge? You've got fiction and non-fiction. You've got a variety of cultures that you cover as well. So like, what's at the heart of all that?
My fiction's my fun writing. I do that just because I enjoy doing it.
Fun to read too. If anybody
Thank
hasn't,
you.
please check it out. It's really, really cool.
Thank you for saying that.
Mm.
My nonfiction, I think it started out initially because I felt like there were certain niches that were not being addressed at the time. And again, this would have been 2012, 2013. So,
Mm.
when dinosaurs walked the earth in the
Mm-hmm.
ancient before times. Uh, and I wanted to be able to help people find things that they were looking for in sort of an easy to understand and relatable way. So I started doing this series through Moon Books. They're called Pagan Portals, and they're short. They're 100 pages generally. They're meant to be basic introductions to topics. And I found out that apparently I'm quite good at that.
Yes,
I
you are. Yes.
Who would have known? Um, I did not know until I started doing it that I had a talent for it, but I've been told that people find that I have a knack for taking something that's complicated and making it more easily understandable,
Absolutely.
which I
Absolutely.
think is what we need more of
Yeah.
because a lot of authors go the other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
They take
Yeah.
something that should be straightforward and they make it overly complicated. So
Yeah.
I think the reason I keep writing and what drives me to do it is that I feel like I am in a position to help people to find this information and to maybe understand it and act as a starting point
Mm.
for people to then go further and go deeper. And like I said, at least with my Irish pagan focused work, I try to highlight sources in Ireland and help because I realize that a lot of people in the US don't even know where to look. They
Mm.
don't know where to start.
Mm.
They don't know how to figure out what's a good source, what's a bad source, who to listen to, any of this stuff. Um, Not that I'm perfect at this, but I try to at least show people like
Yeah.
this is a good option. This is a good source. This is a place where you can find
Mm.
information on stuff, because what happens is someone's looking for, say, the other crowd, and the first layer of information they're going to hit is going to be that really distorted, not accurate,
Pop culture. Yeah.
yeah, largely fictionalized. And then they stop there because they think, well, this is it. I found this is what I'm looking
Mm.
for.
Mm.
Instead of understanding that, like, no, that's like I'm going to be so offensive for a moment. That's like the garbage floating on top of the water. You have to kind of
Yeah. There's
dig through
depths.
that.
There's depths, sir. Please keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. Keep looking. Um, so, I think that's a lot of what drives me, is just trying to help people
Mm.
sort out the quality from the
Yeah.
floating
Yeah.
garbage.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons you are the only non-native Irish author or teacher that we actually host at the Irish Pagan School, because our mission is to promote Irish sources, as you know.
As it should
And
be.
yeah, and you have basically earned your place there because of that, but because of your translation work as well, we felt that the contribution that you make to source culture is actually quite significant as well in its own right. Um, so just the quality of information that you offer, and the fact that you're so respectful of source, and that you are also in right relationship because you are directly contributing back to the culture, that has really settled it for us, and that's what has earned you a place among our among our teachers at the Irish Pagan School. But that that need for beginner and basic information has been very much felt by us as well. While we have, we have doctors and masters and all the rest of it who teach at the Irish Pagan School, absolutely experts in our field. And I would include you absolutely among those ranking as well. But the accessibility is what is the most important for us. So trying to, and I think that's work I've taken on particularly. John does a bit of it as well through the free content, but just really trying to bring it back to that beginner's mind. And, because when you've been 3-4 decades in it, like we have, it can be it could be very easy to jump straight to the next level and the next level and the next level. And I find it very useful personally for myself to keep resetting back there, and to keep working with students the way we do, to keep answering the questions, to keep doing the podcast interviews, to keep going to the events and the conferences, and really listening to the community. Our Tua that we've built through the Irish Pagan School is absolutely phenomenal. It's possibly the thing, don't tell my children or my grandchildren, but it's possibly the thing I'm most proud of in my work in the world, is this, the safety and the quality of the community that we have through the Irish Pagan School, the Ohm Academy, the Morgan Academy, any events we run, anything like that, but also the teachers that are there, that are part of the Tua as well, and what we have to offer. And it's just so important that whatever level people are coming at, that they understand that you always benefit from going back to basics,
Mm-hmm.
that the approaching that with beginner's mind. And we would get a lot of people coming to us who think that they have, they've maybe got a Celtic studies degree, or they have, been practicing Irish witchcraft for 20 years, and, learned from a coven who was dedicated to Danu and Billa, and roll eyes. Um, there's reasons for that. Danu and Billa is not a real thing. Sorry
Yeah.
for anybody who is, but yes, they were just classics from the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and just that level of misinformation that has been integrated is so, like, I would almost say it's nativized at this point in pagan culture, that it's literally generations old, it's decades old now, and it's wrong. It's all wrong. So going back to basics is always going to serve you, and that's why I think your books are so valuable in a long-winded way to to get around to that.
Thank you. And I just want to put out there that I learn new things all the time.
Same.
And, even as someone who's been doing this as long as I've been doing this, which is not a short amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
we won't get into how old I am, but it's not a short amount of time. And
Decades, don't it?
yeah, who's been
We can
writing
leave it at
books,
that.
yeah, and all this other stuff. There's still points where I learned something and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that,
Mm-hmm.
or oh, this is a new perspective that I hadn't considered, or even occasionally I'll run across something and I'll be like, oh, I completely misunderstood that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Doing a second edition of my Irish witchcraft book, which was the first book that was published. So I did a second edition in 2020 after it coming out in, oh, was it 2004? I think it was first.
I think I have the original, the classic.
The classic. Going through that was a real eye opener for me, I have to say. And there's so much that even at that time was academically accepted, was
Yep.
like nobody could be faulted for having taught it or taught it or learned it or anything like that. So like we're not here to cast shade on people. We're never at that. But what we are here is like to make sure that people understand that there's always something new to learn, and you have to have those authentic resources to be able to do that, but you have to be learning from people who are also learning,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's really important. And I think a lot of authors that I would have known from back in the day, of our kin and older, um, really stopped learning somewhere back in the day and have their kind of shtick that the old reliable things that they trot out at every conference and rehash into various different books, and it's all variations on a theme, but there's very little progress or evolving going on, and the world is changing. So like from the 2000s to now, it's like a different planet in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
like how can anything stay stagnant like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people mistakenly think that once a theory or an idea is out there in the academic world, that it's like amber, like it just, that is it, it exists, that's what everyone thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And, don't understand that actually academic opinions and perspectives are constantly changing.
Yeah.
There's new information, there's new whatever that gets uncovered. And, I ran into this recently because I've stopped using the word Celtic. I now, when I do use it, I'll say Celtic language speaking
Yeah.
cultures
Yeah.
to be really clear, because the term Celtic has really kind of fallen out of favor, I guess you would say, in academia, because it's just considered to be too broad and too vague. And
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. The only reason, like, since I started the Irish Pagan School, where if you see Celtic anywhere, it's literally for SEO because that is what
yeah,
people are
yeah,
searching for. So sometimes I have to put it into a title or a description, but it's usually in like bunny quotes.
yep, yep. And I do the same thing. There's
Mm.
I recently had a book come out, Celtic fairies in North America, and I did in the book discuss the fact that I don't actually like to use the term Celtic, but in this case, there really isn't anything else that isn't going to be like 8 words long,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's not going
That's
to
not
work in
gonna
the title.
it's not gonna work in the
No,
title. And
no. So
the thing
sometimes you
is,
have to.
you have to meet people where they are,
Yeah.
is I think much of what we've been saying here. And that goes for those kind of terms, but then educate them as to why we don't use these terms so that
Right.
things grow and evolve, and our own communities and our own pagan culture grows and evolves.
Yeah, I think the biggest, most important thing for anyone to take away is just keep an open mind.
Mm.
You know, and particularly I find that people who maybe got a degree in the 80s or the 90s or the early
Mm-hmm.
2000s, can sometimes really struggle, when you're saying something that is now considered new information or is an accepted theory today,
Mm.
and it's not what they were taught,
Mm.
in university. And I understand that cognitive dissonance. You're like, I I have a degree in this. This is what my university told me, 20, 30 years ago. Except now that's not what people are teaching anymore.
Yeah.
It's kind of moved on. And I think for pagans, it's the same thing. You have to have that understanding of like, okay, this is the information I was exposed to in the 90s. Unfortunately, it's a sad period of time for pagan information, but I started there too,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
not throwing
Same.
stones.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to just be aware. Okay, but things change,
Mm.
information changes, and it's perfectly fine
Yeah.
to keep an open mind and realize that. You know.
Exactly. And while there will always be people who make their Celtic studies degree their entire personality and, just double down on that, that's okay. Leave them off, whatever. But any academic, if your college was teaching you that Yeats and Lady Gregory were you know quality source material for Irish culture and heritage, well, literary culture certainly they are,
Yeah.
but with regard to folklore or history or anything like that, no. Mythology, oh my goodness, Lady Gregory is a mythology source.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I just need a moment. Um, Yeats for folklore. Okay, we can move on. We will be talking about this later on in the series because Morgan has a class about Yeats in the Irish Pagan Schools. So we will have a whole episode on why we're saying the things we're saying. So again, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. But yeah, the one of the worst things I think in that whole realm is when people seem to think that the older a source is, the better it is, or the more authentic, or the more
Yeah.
quality, and that's just not how academics work. Like
No.
this is a living, breathing, evolving academic tradition here in Ireland. Is where much of the cutting edge kind of research is being done. I would have been professionally involved in a lot of the archaeological discoveries that were happening around Roscommon for many years, and just saw things change so much,
Mm-hmm.
from one year to the next often. And the discovery of pagan idols and the reimagining of what Rathcroghan was actually used for, and just so many different layers of history that get uncovered all the time. And whether that's tangible archaeology or whether it's our literary history and our medieval mythology and all the rest of it, or our folklore, which is still a living tradition here in Ireland. It's still
Mm-hmm.
part of our actual everyday culture. Not as prevalent as it used to be, particularly in cities, definitely. But you go in the country and there's not many who would take a spade into a fairy mound now, to be honest, still to this day.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be believing in fairies or anything. But sure, why would you take the chance?
Right. Right.
So on that note, if anybody wants, before the next video comes out, if you want to take a deeper dive into Morgan's teachings, I'm going to put a link to their Amazon. Sorry, Evil Empire, I know, but their Amazon author profile. I'm going to put that in the description so you can go and check out all of their books there. You don't have to buy them for there, but at least you'll know what's on offer. Again, there's a lot, and so you can have a little browse and see if anything takes your fancy, and then order it in your local bookstore if you would prefer to do that. Or, if Amazon suits you, if you need to use Amazon, that's fine too. No shade. But we also have a wide range of on-demand classes available at the Irish Pagan School. So I will also put a link to your Irish Pagan School author profile as well. So that'll be two links below for a range of Morgan Daimler's excellent teaching on a variety of topics. And there's going to be a playlist up here somewhere, so you will be able to see more of this excellent free content as well. So thank you so much, Morgan, and we will see you in the next video.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.